right.
And I'm at the hour. So, here we are again, as always, back in the library. Even though I attempt to do my little bit, but I still do have to fill the time for, what you call it, anyone who might not be here immediately upon me going live, which, I mean, yeah, it's fair enough to give them a chance to come for the main thing, but really they're missing out, because they never get to hear me say, and I'll make that the hour, which is the best, I think is the best part of the stream. I think most of the people here would agree. I mean, come on, that's iconic. But yeah, so, I hope everyone's doing well. Which is to say, I hope Abe's doing well, because I'm fairly certain they're the only one here at the minute. Not Abe is not the old word. So, what else have we got to talk about then? Now that I'm not doing my little canned, is anyone here bit. I suppose we're better talking about my day, which it's a bit odd at the minute, because normally, I think I sort of hurt myself, because I think it was like a week ago, I took like 3 days off to go and rest my voice, and I decided to collect a whole bunch of books while I was off. I think that sort of hurt me, because normally what I would do on a given day is go out and find books and then explore the library, which is quite interesting. But I haven't been doing that as much lately, because the Lamp's got me constructing new shelves, because we got all those books during that time, so we can sort of rest on our laurels a bit with that. And I was a bit, I sort of thought he was jumping the gun a bit actually when I started building them, because I mean if you look around the library here, it's still pretty barren mostly. But then Lamp made me do an inventory this morning, which I think was sort of meant to tell me a lesson. You know, we've got more than 100 books in here now. Like, it's crazy, there's like 120 something. That's mad, you know? I mean, I remember when I only had the one, it was, The Art of War, which, that's, well, it's over here, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, just there, the first one I ever found, The Art of War. Once upon a time that was the only book on any of these shelves. And now, look at everything. All these 120 books gone ungathered. Crazy. And I don't know how many books we've got space for, really. Like, I mean, these don't feel like they're that much. I think there's probably room for 5 or 6 times as many still. Maybe not quite so much. I don't know, but there's still a lot of space. But I guess I do understand why Lamp's having me build shelves, because these ones took me 2 years to make, and at the rate we're going, 120 books over, it's been about 3 months. So yeah, so about a year or so we'll probably, like from now, we'll probably have this all filled out. Maybe more if I keep going quicker, which I've been doing lately. So you never know. But yeah, I've been working on that. What else I've been doing? It's been a lot of day hard actually. Beast has been a bit more active than usual the last couple of days. I think because Lamp, I mentioned last time, Lamp has opened up what he calls it, like just a ventilation shaft up the surface, which lets some air in, and I think that's got the beast rolled up because it's weird. And so they've been a bit more active lately. The Whistler's been by a couple of times. I assume people know who the Whistler is. He's he's a beast, and he whistles and he walks real slow, and he's annoying because most of the beasts they're like animals basically. They're sort of like weird amalgam dogs and like monsters and stuff, and they'll charge at you and scream and stuff. But if you're hard, they don't have patience to stop and look around. But the Whistler will just come around and hang about, and like I can't be out and about while he's here, even if he's on the other side of the wards, because you know if he sees me, you know that I'm here, and then he'll come back and he'll just go through books and he'll look, and he's very slow and he's very patient for a beast, which makes him very annoying. Yeah, I hate that guy. What else? I've been trying to organise some of the cursed objects we got down here. I guess Lamp says I should call them magic items because not all of them is cursed, but I mean most of them is cursed. Like I normally just throw them into sort of junk rooms, but like Lamp has been talking about expanding stuff and moving things around, and so I started trying to categorise some of them. I haven't done very much yet. All I've got so far is like there's a rock that glows and doesn't seem to do anything else in this weird sort of fractal art, which I don't know what that does. Don't like it, but yeah, I'm categorising those. And it's about like keep an eye out while I'm out gathering materials to build the shelves across the way. Lamp has decided that these ones need to be nicer, so I'll take a bit more time and a bit more selective. So I've got an eye on quite a lot of books actually. I think I could place like maybe 20 or so ones that I'm pretty sure is good. You know, like I am starting to get a sense of how they're all laid out, and I mean they're not organised because the whole place is in disarray. But you know, I've got an idea of where they is and where you're likely to find a thing. So you know that's useful. What else? I don't know really. We're at 5 past, so I can probably start now. But I'm trying to get better at this whole like vamping thing. It feels like it's an important skill to have if I'm going to do this. You know, like filling airtime, just talking. The problem is, I think what most people generally talk about is themselves, and I'm not actually very interesting. I'm just a rat, you know. Like I read books and I build shelves, and I don't do much. The library's interesting, but I don't really like. It's one of those things where you know you're so used to a place like you don't really know what's interesting about it. Like, you know, what's interesting? Is it like the flying books or the screaming beasts? Is it the magic items? Is it the books? Is it the sort of architecture? You know, and there's just stuff going on, and all of it's like probably interesting to someone or on some level. But what's interesting enough to talk about, and what's just, you know, oh, that's kind of neat, sort of interesting, you know? I can't be sure. Yeah, spent a bit of time doing ward repair. That's kind of dull. I mean, like, I could talk about it, but I'm sure you all know, like, you know, it's just the runes and sort of AETs and all that. Like, you know, you guys know what the symbols are, don't you? All there along the bottom of the screen. That's basic. Nah, that's boring. What else can we talk about? Wearing my little jacket today. This one's quite nice. I make all of my own clothes. Did you know that? Yeah, I take them off. Well, I take the clothes off of dead wizards, because they're just abundant and everywhere. And then I sort of refashion and make them. I have to gnaw a lot of that stuff because like scissors is hard when you're a rat. But surprisingly good at sort of stitching. It's if you have like a small enough needle, it's actually like my little hands are pretty good at that. So that's good. I do a lot of that. I'm just filling time here. I don't know. It feels bad to sort of admit that, really. Like the idea that I'm just talking to fill time is, I mean, fundamentally it's true of like any of this, right? Like this whole thing is, like, you know, I mean, like Lamp's thing here is that I'm supposed to read books and he thinks it's educational, which, yeah, it probably is on some level, but like people aren't here to be educated, I suspect. Like you'd be at a school for that. You're here to hear stories, which, I mean, fair enough. Stories is good, but we're basically just filling time here. And you know, some of it's the filling the time with stories, which maybe it's not a bad thing to admit, I guess. I mean, we's all adults here, I presume. So I guess we all know we're here to fill time and do stuff. So maybe being honest about that is reasonable. I don't know, really. I spend a fair bit of time watching other streamers, because it's one of the only things I got down here that I can do in my spare time. Other than reread books I've already read, because Lamp won't let me read new ones. So, and I know that I'm very different than most of them. Obviously, most of them play games and stuff, which I can't do because Lamp doesn't have any games. But like, I don't know. The way I do things is weird. And most people think that's a good thing, but it makes you feel a bit odd. And as a rat, you always feel a bit odd anyway, so maybe it's a compounding thing. I don't know. Who's to say, really? Anyhow, I think I've waffled enough. We're almost at the 10-minute mark, which is what Lamp wants me to do, so that's good. Filling the time. But yeah, so as always, as I'm about to start, if anyone wants me to go back over something, if they've missed it, or if I've stumbled, or if just, you know, or if you just want to hear the same words over again, really, like, I don't think anyone would mind, let me know and we'll start, or we'll go back over it for a bit. If you have comments, questions, funny little thoughts, you just want to say always happy to say to a chatter, always happy to chat. I probably should say what we're doing today. We're doing more of these Kafka ones. These are all medium length. So I'm thinking, I don't think they should take too long. Maybe, I'm not exactly sure how long they'll take each. I've got in my head they're going to be an hour and a half a piece, but I'm not sure where I'm getting that from, honestly. I generally have an idea of it, but I'm just guesstimating. But we'll do the first one, which is Investigations of a Dog, and then depending on how we feel once that's done, we'll move on to The Borough, which is the next one. Or we won't. We'll see how we feel after that. But yeah. That's all I've got to say, I suppose. So, without any further ado. Investigations of a Dog. How much my life has changed, and yet how unchanged it has remained at bottom. When I think back and recall the time when I was still a member of the canine community, sharing in all its preoccupations, a dog among dogs, I find on closer examination that from the very beginning I sensed some discrepancy, some little maladjustment causing a slight feeling of discomfort, which not even the most decorous public functions could eliminate. More, that sometimes, no not sometimes, but very often, the mere look of some fellow dog in my own circle that I was fond of, the mere look of him, as if I had just caught it for the first time, would fill me with helpless embarrassment and fear, even with despair. I tried to quiet my apprehensions as best I could. Friends to whom I divulged them helped me. More peaceful times came. Times, it is true, in which these sudden surprises were not lacking, but in which they were accepted with more philosophy, fitted into my life with more philosophy, inducing a certain melancholy and lethargy. It may be, but nevertheless allowing me to carry on as a somewhat cold, reserved, shy and calculating, but all things considered, normal enough dog. How indeed, without these intervals of convalescence, could I have reached the age that I enjoy at present? How could I have fought my way through to the serenity with which I contemplate the terrors of youth, and endure the terrors of age? How could I have come to that point where I am able to draw the consequences of my admittedly unhappy, or, to put it more moderately, not very happy position, and live almost entirely in accordance with them? solitary and withdrawn, with nothing to occupy me save my hopeless, but, as far as I am concerned, indispensable little investigations. That is how I live. In my distant isolation I have not lost sight of my people. News often penetrates to me, and now and then I even let news of myself reach them. The others treat me with respect, but do not understand my way of life. Yet they bear me no grudge, and even young dogs whom I sometimes see passing in the distance, a new generation of whose childhood I have only a vague memory, do not deny me a reverential greeting. For it must not be assumed that for all my peculiarities, which lie open to their day, I am in the least exempt from the laws of my species. Indeed, when I reflect on it, and I have time and disposition and capacity enough for that, I see that dogdom is in every way a marvellous institution. Apart from us dogs, there are all sorts of creatures in the world, wretched, limited, dumb creatures who have no language but mechanical cries. Many of us dogs study them, having given them names, try to help them educate themselves, uplift them, and so on. For my part, I am quite indifferent to them, except when they try to disturb me. I confuse them with one another. I ignore them. But one thing is too obvious to have escaped me, namely, how little inclined they are, compared with us dogs, to stick together. How silently and unfamiliarly, and with what a curious hostility they passed each other by. How mean are the interests that suffice to bind them together for a little inostensible union, and how often these very interests give rise to hatred and conflict. Consider us dogs, on the other hand. One can safely say that we all live together in a literal heap, all of us, different as we are from one another, on account of numberless and profound modifications which have arisen in the course of time, all in one heap. We are drawn to each other, and nothing can prevent us from satisfying the communal impulse. All our laws and institutions, the few that I still know and the many that I have forgotten, go back to this longing for the greatest bliss we are capable of, the warm comfort of being together. But now consider the other side of the picture. No creatures, to my knowledge, live in such a wide dispersion as we dogs. None have so many distinctions of class, of kind, of occupation, distinctions too numerous to review at a glance. We, whose one desire is to stick together, and again we succeed at transcendent moments in spite of everything, we above all others are compelled to live separated from one another by strange vocations that are often incomprehensible, even to our canine neighbours, holding firmly the laws that are not those of the dog world, but are actually directed against it. How baffling these questions are, questions on which one would prefer not to touch. I understand that standpoint too, even better than my own, yet questions to which I have completely capitulated. Why do I not do as the others, live in harmony with my people, and accept in silence whatever disturbs the harmony, ignoring it as a small error in the great account, always keeping in mind these things that bind us happily together, not those that drive us again and again, although by sheer force, out of our social circle? I can recall an incident in my youth. I was at the time in one of those inexplicable blissful states of exaltation, which everyone must have experienced as a child. I was still quite a puppy. Everything pleased me, everything was my concern. I believed that great things were going on around me, of which I was the leader, and to which I must lend my voice. Things which must be wretchedly thrown aside if I did not run for them and wag my tail for them. Childish fantasies that fled with riper years. But at the time their power was very great. I was completely under their spell, and presently something actually did happen, something so extraordinary that it seemed to justify my wild expectations. In itself it was nothing very extraordinary, for I have seen many such things, and more remarkable things too, often enough since, but at the time it struck me with all the force of a first impression, one of those impressions which can never be erased and influence much of one's later conduct. I encountered, in short, a little company of dogs, or rather I did not encounter them. They appeared before me. Before that I had been running along in darkness for some time, filled with a premonition of great things, a premonition that may well have been delusive, for I always had it. I have run in darkness for a long time, up and down, blind and deaf to everything, led on by nothing but a vague desire, and now I suddenly come to a stop, with the feeling that I were in the right place, and looking up saw that it was bright day, only a little hazy, and everywhere a blending and confusion of the most intoxicating smells. I greeted the morning with an uncertain barking when, as if I had conjured them up, out of the same place of darkness, to the accompaniment of terrible sounds such as I have never heard before, 7 dogs stepped in the light. Had I not distinctly seen that they were dogs, and that they themselves brought the sound with them, though I could not recognise how they produced it, I would have run away at once. As it were, I stayed. At that time I still knew hardly anything of the creative gift, the music with which the canine race alone is endowed. Yet naturally enough escaped my but slowly developing power of observation. Though music had surrounded me as a perfectly natural and indispensable element of existence ever since I was a suckling, an element which nothing impelled me to distinguish from the rest of my existence, my elders had drawn my attention to it only by such hints as were suitable for a childish understanding. All the more astounding, then, indeed devastating, were the 7 great musical artists to me. They did not speak, they did not sing, they remained all of them silent, almost determinedly silent, but from the empty air they conjured music. Everything was music, the lifting and setting down of their feet, certain turns of the head, their running about and their standing still, the positions they took up in relation to one another, the symmetrical patterns which they produced by one dog setting his front paw on the back of another, and the rest following suit, until the first bore the weight of the other 6, all lying flat on the ground and then crawling through complicated, concerted evolutions. And none made a false move, not even the last dog. They were a little unsure, did not always establish contact at once with the others, sometimes hesitated, as it were, on the stroke of the beat, but were unsure only by comparison with the superb sureness of the others. And even if he had been much more unsure, indeed quite unsure, would not have been able to do any harm, the others, great masters all of them, keeping the rhythm so unshakably. But it is too much to say that I saw them clearly. I actually even saw them. They appeared from somewhere. I inwardly greeted them as dogs, and although I was profoundly confused by the sounds that accompanied them, yet they were dogs nevertheless, dogs like you and me. I regarded them by force of habit simply as dogs. I had happened to meet on my road, and felt a wish to approach them and exchange greetings. They were quite near 2 dogs, much older than me, certainly, and not of my woolly, long-haired kind, but yet not so very alien in size and shape. Indeed quite familiar to me, for I had already seen many such or similar dogs. But while I was still involved in these reflections, the music insensibly got the upper hand, literally knocked the breath out of me, and swept me far away from those actual little dogs, and quite against my will, while I howled as if some pain were being inflicted upon me. My mind could attend nothing but this blast of music which seemed to come from all sides, from the arts, from the deeps, from everywhere, seizing the listener by the middle, overwhelming him, crushing him, and over his swimming body still blowing fanfares, so near they seemed far away and almost inaudible. And then a respite came, for one were already too exhausted, too annulled, too feeble to listen any longer. A respite came, and I beheld again the 7 little dogs carrying out their evolutions, making their leaps. I longed to shout to them in spite of their aloofness, to beg them to enlighten me, to ask them what they were doing. I was a child, and believed I could ask anybody about anything. But hardly had I begun, hardly did I feel on good and familiar doggish terms with the 7, when the music started again, robbed me of my wits, whirled me round in its circles as if I myself were one of the musicians, instead of being only their victim, cast me hither and thither, no matter how much I begged for mercy, and rescued me finally from its own violence by divulging me into a labyrinth of wooden bars which rose around that place, though I had not noticed it before, but which now firmly caught me, kept my head pressed to the ground, and though the music still resounded in the open space beyond me, gave me a little time to get my breath back. I must admit that I was less surprised by the artistry of the 7 dogs, who were incomprehensible to me, and also quite definitively beyond my capacities, than by their courage in facing so openly the music of their own making, and their power to endure it calmly without collapsing. But now from my hiding place I saw, on looking more closely, that it was not so much coolness as the most extreme tension that characterised their performance. Those limbs, apparently so sure in their movements, quivered every step with a perpetual apprehensiveness, twitching. As if ridged with despair, the dogs kept their eyes fixed on one another, and their tongues, wherever the tension weakened for a moment, hung wearily from their jowls. It could not be fear of failure that agitated them so deeply. Dogs that could not dare and achieve such things had no need to fear that. Dogs that could dare and achieve such things had no need to fear that. Then why were they afraid? Who then forced them to do what they were doing? And I could no longer refrain myself, particularly as they now seemed in some incomprehensible way in need of help. And so through all the din of music I shouted out my question loudly and challengingly. But they, incredible, they never replied, behaved as if I were not there. Dogs who make no reply to the greeting of other dogs are guilty of an offence against good manners, which the humblest dog would never pardon any more than the greatest. Perhaps they were not dogs at all. But how should they not be dogs? Could I not actually hear on the listening more closely that subdued cries with which they encouraged each other, drew each other's attention to difficulties, warned each other against errors? Could I not see the last and youngest dog, to whom most of these cries were addressed, often stealing glances at me as if he would have dearly wished to reply, but refrained because it were not allowed? But why should it not be allowed? Why should the very thing which our laws unconditionally command not be allowed in this one case? I became indignant at the thought and almost forgot the music. Those dogs were violating the law. Great magicians they might be, but the law were valid for them too. I knew that quite well, though I were a child. And having recognised that, I now noticed something else. They had good grounds for remaining silent, that is, assuming that they remained silent from a sense of shame. For how were they conducting themselves? Because of all the music I had not noticed it before, but they had flung away all shame. The wretched creatures were doing the very thing which is both most ridiculous and indecent in our eyes. They were walking on their own legs. Fie on them! They were uncovering their nakedness, blatantly making a show of their nakedness. They were doing that as though it were a meritorious act, and when, obeying their better instincts, for a moment they happened to let their front paws fall, they were literally appalled as if an error, as if nature were in error, hastily raised their legs again, and their eyes seemed to be begging forgiveness for having been forced to cease momentarily from their abomination. Was the world standing on its head? Where could I be? What could have happened? If only for my own sake, I dared not hesitate any longer now. I dislodged myself from the tangle of bars, took one leap into the open, and made towards the dogs. Ah, the younger scholar must be the teacher now, must make them understand what they were doing, must keep them from committing further sin. And old dogs too, I kept on saying to myself. And scarcely were I free, and only a leap or two away from the dogs, when the music again had me in its power. Perhaps in my ardour I might even have managed to withstand it, for I knew it better now, if in all the midst of its majestic amplitude, which were terrifying, but still not unconquerable, a clear pace and continuous note which came without variation, literally from the remotest distance, perhaps the real melody in the midst of the music, had not now rung out, forcing me to my knees. Oh, the music these dogs made almost drove me out of my senses. I could not move a step further. I no longer wanted to instruct them. They could go on raising their front legs, committing sin and seducing others to the sin, as silently regarding them. I was such a young dog. Who could demand such a difficult task from me? I made myself still more insignificant than I was. I whimpered, and if the dogs had asked me now what I thought of their performance, probably I would have had not a word to say against it. Besides, it were not long before the dogs vanished with all their music and their radiance into the darkness from which they had emerged. I'm going to pause there for a moment to take a breath. So just to give some context as to why I was reading that the way I was reading that, that was 5 solid pages without a paragraph break. Now, to be clear, the start of this text has paragraph breaks at reasonably regular points. But then there were 5 pages without one, which I didn't feel like I could stop in the middle of a paragraph. But 5 pages is too many pages to go without a paragraph break, so just going to stop and have a quick drink. To be clear, I should say, I've complained about paragraph breaks before, and Billy Budd taught them. And in there it were annoying, but it were worse in there because it was like a case of, it wasn't finished, so there should have been some more. This, I think, is deliberate, and it's a little hard to read, especially aloud. But I don't think it's bad necessarily. It's just a bit like quite a lot to be taken on when you're reading it all aloud and don't feel like you can stop in the middle of a paragraph. Yeah, back to it. As I've already said, this whole episode contains nothing of much note. In the course of long life, one encounters all sorts of things which, taken from their context and seen through the eyes of a child, might well seem far more astonishing. Besides, one may, of course, in the pungent popular phrase, have got it all wrong, as well as everything connected with it. Then it could be demonstrated that this was simply a case where 7 musicians had assembled to practice their art in the morning stillness, That very young dog had strayed to the place, a burdensome intruder, and had tried to draw away by particularly terrifying or who they have tried to draw away by particularly terrifying or lofty music, unfortunately without success. He pestered them with his questions. Were they, already disturbed enough by the presence of the stranger, be expected to attend to his distracting interruptions, as well as make them worse by responding to them? Even if the law commands us to reply to everybody, was such a tiny strayed dog in truth somebody worth regarding? And perhaps they did not even understand him, for likely enough he barked his questions very indistinctly. Or perhaps they did understand him, and with great self-control answered his questions, but he, a mere puppy, unaccustomed to music, could not distinguish the answer from the music. And as for walking on their own legs, perhaps unlike other dogs, they actually used only these for walking. If it were a sin, well, it were a sin. But they were alone, 7 friends together, as intimate a gathering in their own 4 walls, so to speak, quite privately, so to speak. For one's friends, after all, are not the public. Where the public is not present, an inquisitive little street dog is certainly not capable of constituting it. But granting this, is it not as if nothing at all had happened? It is not quite so, but very nearly so, and parents should not let their children run about so freely. And had much better teach them to hold their tongue and respect the aged. If all this is admitted, then it does... Sorry, I'm struggling a little bit with this one. Yeah. If all this is admitted, then it disposes the old case. But many things that are disposed of in the minds of grown-ups are not yet settled in the minds of the young. I rushed about, told my story, asked questions, made accusations and investigations, tried to drag others to the place where this had all happened, and burned to show everybody where I had stood, and where the 7 had stood, and where and how they had danced, and made their music. And if anyone had come with me, instead of shaking me off and laughing at me, I would probably have sacrificed my innocence and tried myself to stand on my own legs so as to reconstruct the scene clearly. Now, children are blamed for all they do, but also in the last resort forgiven for all they do. And I've preserved my childish qualities, and in spite of that have grown to be an old dog. Well, just as at that time, I keep on unceasingly discussing the foregoing incident, which today I must confess I lay far less importance upon, analysing it into its constituent parts, arguing it with my listeners without regard to the company I found myself in, devoting my whole time to the problem, which I found as wearisome as everybody else, but which, that was the difference. For that very reason I was resolved to pursue indefatigably until I solved it, so that I might be left free to regain the ordinary calm, happy life of every day. Just so have I, though with less childish means, yet the difference is not so very great, laboured in the years since and go on labouring today. Lord, was metamorphosis as hard as this? Didn't feel like it. I'm struggling with this one a bit. It feels sort of deliberately obtuse, dense, I don't know. Still, the more I delay, the longer it will be. So, but it began with that concert. I do not blame the concert. It is my innate disposition that has driven me on, and it would certainly have found some or other opportunity of coming into action had the concert never taken place. Yet the fact that it happened so soon used to make me feel sorry for myself. It robbed me of a great part of my childhood, the blissful life of the young dog, which many can spin out for years, in my case lasted only a few short months. So be it. There are more important things than childhood, and perhaps I have the prospect of far more childish happiness earned by a life of hard work in my old age than any actual child would have the strength to bear. But which then I shall possess. I began my inquiries with the simplest things. There were no lack of material. It is the actual superabundance, unfortunately, that cast me into despair in my darkest hours. I began to inquire into the question, what the canine race nourished itself upon. Now that is, if you like, by no means a simple question, of course. It has occupied us since the dawn of time. It is the chief object of all our meditation. Countless observations and essays and views on the subject have been published. It has grown into a province of knowledge which, in its prodigious compass, is not only beyond the comprehension of any single scholar, but of all our scholars collectively, a burden which cannot be borne except by the whole of the dog community, and even then not without difficulty and only in part, for for it ever and again crumbles away like a neglected ancestral inheritance and must laboriously be rehabilitated anew. Not to speak at all of the difficulties and almost unfulfillable conditions of my investigations. No one need point all this out to me. I know it all as well as any average sensual dog can do. I have no ambition to meddle with real scientific matters. I have all the respect for knowledge that it deserves, but to increase knowledge I lack the equipment, the diligence, the leisure, and, not least and particularly during the past few years, the desire as well. I swallowed down my food, but the slightest preliminary methodical political economical observation of it. Gonna go over that one again slower, just as a point. But the slightest preliminary methodical political economical observation of it does not seem to be worthwhile. I feel like this book is messing with me. In this connection, the essence of all knowledge is enough for me, a simple rule with which the mother weans her young, once from her teats and sends them out into the world. Water the ground as much as she can, and there's not almost everything contained in that. What a scientific inquiry ever since our first fathers inaugurated it, of decisive importance to add to it. Mere details, and how uncertain they are. But this rule will remain as long as we are dogs. It concerns our staple food. True, we have also other resources, but only at a pinch, and if the year is not too bad, we could live on this staple food. We find it in the earth, but the earth needs our water to nourish it, and only the price at that price provides us with our food. The emergence of which, however, and this should not be forgotten, can also be hastened by certain spells, songs, and ritual movements. But in my opinion, that is all. There is nothing else that is fundamental to be said on the question. In this opinion, moreover, I am at one with the vast majority of the dog community, and must firmly dissociate myself from all heretical views on this point. Quite honestly, I have no ambition to be peculiar, or to pose as being in the right against the majority. I am only too happy when I can agree with my comrades, as I do in this case. My own inquiries, however, are in another direction. My personal observation tells me that the earth, when it is watered and scratched according to the rules of science, extrudes nourishment, and moreover in such quality, in such abundance, in such ways, in such places, at such hours, as the laws partially or completely established by science demand. I accept all this. My question, however, is the following. Whence does the earth procure this food? A question which people in general pretend not to understand, and which the best answer they can give is, if you haven't enough to eat, we'll give you some of ours. Now consider this answer. I know that it is not one of the virtues of dogdom to share with others food that one has once gained possession of. Life is hard, the earth stubborn, science rich in knowledge but poor in practical results. Anyone who has food keeps it to himself. That is not selfishness, but the opposite. Dog law, the unanimous decision of the people, the outcome of their victory over egoism. For the possessors are always in a minority, and for that reason this answer, if you haven't enough to eat, we'll give you some of ours, is merely a way of speaking, a jest, a form of raillery. I have not forgotten that. But all the more significant did it seem to me, when I was rushing about everywhere with my questions during those days, they put the jest aside as far as I was concerned. True, they did not actually give me anything to eat. Where could they have found it, at a moment's notice? And even if anyone chanced to have found some food, naturally he forgot everything else in this fury of his hunger. Yet they all seriously meant what they said when they made the offer, and here and there, right enough, I was presently allowed some slight trifle, if I were only smart enough to snatch it quickly. How came it that people treated me so strangely, pampered me, favoured me? Because I were a lean dog, badly fed and neglected of my needs? But there were countless badly fed dogs running about, and the others snatched even the wretchedest scrap from under their noses whenever they could, and not offered from greed, but genuinely on principle. Now they treated me with special favour. I cannot give much detailed proof of this, but I have a firm conviction that it was so. Was it my questions then that pleased them, and that they regarded as so clever? No, my questions did not please them, and were generally looked on as stupid. And yet it could not only have been my questions that won me their attention. It was if they would rather do the impossible, that is, stop my mouth with food. They did not do it, but they would have liked to do it, than endure my questions. But in that case, they would have done better to drive me away and refuse to listen to my questions. No, they did not want to do that. They did not indeed want to listen to my questions, but it was because I asked questions they did not want to drive me away. That was the time, much as I was ridiculed and treated like a silly puppy and pushed here and pushed there, the time when I actually enjoyed most public esteem. Ne'er again was I to enjoy anything like it. I had free entry everywhere. No obstacle were put in my way. I were actually flattered, though flattery were disguised as rudeness. And all really because of my questions, my impatience, my thirst for knowledge. Did they want to lull me to sleep? Did they avert me without violence, almost lovingly, from a path that were false, yet not so completely false that violence were permissible? Also a certain respect and fear kept from employing violence. I divined even in those days some of this. Today I know it quite well, far better than those who actually practiced it at the time. What they wanted to do was really to divert me from my path. They did not succeed. They achieved the opposite. My vigilance was sharpened. More it became clear to me that it was I who was trying to seduce up the others, and that I were actually successful up to a certain point. Only with the assistance of the old dog world could I begin to understand my own questions. For instance, when I asked, whence does the earth procure this food, was I troubled, as appearances might well indicate, about the earth? Was I troubled about the labours of the earth? Not in the least. That, as I very soon recognised, was far from my mind. All that I'd care for were the race of dogs, that and nothing else. What is there actually except our own species? To whom can one else appeal in the wide world and the wide and empty world? All knowledge, the totality of all questions and all answers, is contained in the dog. If one could but realise this knowledge, one could but bring it into the light of day, if we dogs would but own that we know infinitely more than we admit to ourselves. Even the most loquacious dog is more secretive of his knowledge than of the places where good food can be found. Trembling with desire, whipping yourself with your own tail, you steal cautiously upon your fellow dog. You ask, you beg, you howl, you bite and achieve what you could have achieved just as well without any effort. Amiable attention, friendly contiguity, honest acceptance, ardent embraces, barks that mingle as one. Everything is directed towards achieving an ecstasy, a forgetting and finding again. But the one thing that you long to win above all, the admission of knowledge, remains denied to you. To such prayers, whether silent or loud, the only answer you get, even after you've employed your power of seduction to the utmost, are vacant stares, averted glances, troubled and veiled eyes. It is much the same as it was when, a mere puppy, I shouted at the dog musicians, and they remained silent. So that were another 4 chapters without a paragraph break. And I think I've got my teeth in this text now, and we're a little way into it, so I'll have a drink and then I'll do a little bit of commentary. It's probably a little early in the text to be doing it, but what I have discovered has annoyed me, so I'm going to complain about it. And due to the nature of what you got streaming as a medium, your ear is a captive audience, and you can't run away and you're not allowed to click off the stream because I say so, and I'm God's specialist little boy. So, I'm fairly certain that this text is a parody of, I almost want to say intellectualism, but that's not really it. I suppose it's self-important intellectualism. The excessive overuse of large words and sort of verbosity, the sort of pseudo-philosophical reflections and all this, and the hidden at things, sort of leads to that. But it's hard to say exactly for sure, because also there's the dog stuff, which... I mean, dogs are a theme quite frequently found in fiction, from my experience. Jack London writes a lot about them, surely. And so I guess it's a common enough literary theme, but there's these like hints at rules, an underlying understanding about the nature of food. And I'm not sure if it's just meant to be, oh, dogs is like this, and sort of it's a tongue-in-cheek thing, or if it's, I mean, it feels like it's more than that, but then I don't really know human stereotypes about dogs. And even less so do I know the stereotypes about dogs among humans that were popular in turn of the century Germany, where I think Kafka were writing. So, not exactly sure how much I can place on that culturally. But yeah, I mean, I'm fairly certain it is like making fun of these ideas of self-important people. These I don't know, pseudo-philosophers, pseudo-intellectuals maybe. I can't really say, that's what I'm getting from it so far. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it will turn out there is something to this and there's a bunch of important, dog lore that will come out of it, but if that's the case, then it being written like this for no reason is If anything, even more annoying. Yeah, this is an hard one to read. And I think it's harder to read aloud than it would be just to read to yourself, but even then it's a tough one. And it's annoying, so I'm complaining about it to you. Still, I'll have another drink and we'll move on. I've got to do all my complaining in the form of literary analysis, otherwise Lamp will yell at me. Which is why I'm breaking it down rather than just saying this book sucks and I don't like reading it. That's not fair, it doesn't suck. I've read bad books, this isn't a bad one, it's just annoying. So yeah. Press on. No one might say you torment yourself because of your fellow dog, because of their silence on crucial questions. You assert that they know more than they admit, more than they will allow to be valid, and that silence, the mysterious reason for which is also, of course, tacitly concealed, poisons the existence and makes it unendurable for you, so you must either alter it or have done with it. That may be, but you are yourself a dog, and you have also the dog knowledge. Well, bring it out, not merely in the form of a question, but as an answer. If you utter it, who will think of opposing you? The great choir of dogdom will join in as if it had just been waiting for you. Then you will have clarity, truth, avowal, as much of them as you desire. The roof of this wretched life, of which you say so many hard things, will burst open, and all of us, shoulder to shoulder, will ascend into the lofty realms of freedom. And if we should not achieve that final consummation, if things should become worse than before, if the old truth should be more insupportable than half of it should be, provided that the silence are in the right as the guardians of existence, if the faint hope that we still possess should give way to complete hopelessness, the attempt is still worth the trial, since you do not desire to live as you are compelled to live. Well then, why do you make it a reproach against these others, that they are silent and remain silent yourself? Easy to answer. Because I am a dog. Hang on, just getting a sense of this. Because I am a dog. In essentials, just as locked in silence as the others, stubbornly resisting my own questions, dour out of fear. To be precise, it is in the hope that they might answer me that I have questioned my fellow dogs, at least into my adult years. Have I any such foolish hope? Can I contemplate the foundations of our existence, divine their profundity, watch the labours of their construction, that dark labour, and expect all this to be forsaken, neglected, undone, simply because I ask a question? No, that I truly expect no longer. I understand my fellow dogs, and flesh of their flesh, for their miserable, ever-renewed, ever-desirous flesh. Yet it is not merely flesh and blood that we have in common, but knowledge also, and not only knowledge, but the key to it as well. I do not possess that key, except in common with all the others. I cannot grasp it without their help. The hardest bones containing the richest marrow can be conquered only by a united crunching of all the teeth of all dogs. That, of course, is only a figure of speech and exaggerated. If all teeth were but ready, they would not need even to bite the bone. To bite, the bones would crack themselves, and the marrow would be freely accessible to the feeblest of dogs. If I remain faithful to this metaphor, then the goal of my aims, my questions, my inquiries appears monstrous. It is true, for I want to compel all dogs thus to assemble together. I want the bones to crack open under the pressure of this collective preparedness, and I want to dismiss them to the ordinary life that they love, while all by myself, quite alone, I lap up the marrow. That sounds monstrous, almost as if I wanted to feed on the marrow, not merely of a bone, but the old canine race itself. But it is only a metaphor. The marrow that I am discussing here is no food. On the contrary, it is a poison. My questions only serve as goad to myself. I only want to be stimulated by the silence which rises up around me, as the ultimate answer. How long will you be able to endure the fact that the world of dogs, as your researches make more and more evident, is pledged to silence and will always be? How long will you be able to endure it? That is the real great question of my life, before which all smaller ones sink into insignificance. It is put to myself alone, and concerns no one else. Unfortunately, I can answer it more easily than the smallest specific questions. I shall probably hold out to my natural end. The calm of old age will put up a greater and greater resistance to all disturbing questions. I shall very likely die in silence and surrounded by silence, indeed almost peacefully, and I look forward to that with composure. An admirably strong art, lungs that it is impossible to use up before their time, have been given to us dogs as if in malice. We survive all questions, even our own bulwarks of silence that we are. Recently I have taken more and more to examining my life, looking for the decisive, the fundamental error that I must surely have made, and I cannot find it. And yet I must have made it, for if I had not made it, and yet were unable to take the diligent labour of a long life to achieve my desire, or by the diligent labour of a long life to achieve my desire, that would prove that my desire is impossible, and complete hopelessness must follow. Behold then, the work of a lifetime. First of all my inquiries into the question, whence does the earth procure that food it gives us? A young dog, at bottom naturally greedy for life, I renounced all enjoyments, apprehensively avoided all pleasures, buried my head between my front paws when I was confronted by temptation, and addressed myself to my task. I were no scholar, neither in the information I acquired, nor in the method, nor in the intention. That were probably a defect, but it could not have been a decisive one. I had little schooling, for I left my mother's care at an early age, soon got used to independence, led a free life, and premature independence is inimical to systematic learning. But I have seen much, listened to much, spoken with dogs of all sorts and conditions. I understood everything. I believe, fairly intelligently, and correlated my particular observations fairly intelligently. That has compensated somewhat for my lack of scholarship, not to mention that independence, if it is a disadvantage in learning things, is an actual advantage when one is making one's own inquiries. In my case, it were all the more necessary as I were not able to employ the real methods of science to avail myself, that is, of the labours of my predecessors and establish contact with contemporary investigators. I were entirely cast on my own resources, begun at the very beginning, and with the consciousness in spirit in the youth, but utterly crushing the age, that the fortuitous point at which I carried my labours must also be the final one. Was I really so alone in my inquiries, at the beginning and up to now? Yes and no. It is inconceivable that there must not always have been, and that there are. Hang on a second. It is inconceivable that there must not always have been, and that there are not today individual dogs in the same case as myself. I cannot be so accursed as that. I do not deviate from the dog nature by hairbreadth. Every dog, like me, has the impulse to question, and I have, like every dog, the impulse not to answer. Everyone has the impulse to question. How otherwise could my questions have affected my hearers in the slightest? And they were often affected my ecstatic delight, and exaggerated delight, I must confess, and how otherwise could I have been prevented from achieving much more than I have done? And that I have the compulsion to remain silent needs unfortunately no particular proof. I am at bottom, then, no different from any other dog. Everybody, no matter how he may differ in opinion from me and reject my views, will gladly admit that, and I in turn will admit as much of any other dog. Only the mixture of the elements is different, a difference very important for the individual, significant for the race. And how can one credit that the completion of these available elements has never been changed for all the past and present to result in a mixture similar to mine? One, moreover, if mine be regarded as unfortunate, more unfortunate still. To think so would be contrary to all experience. We dogs are all engaged in the strangest occupations in which one would refuse to believe if one had not the most reliable information concerning them. The best example I can quote is that of the overing dog. The first time I heard of one, I laughed and simply refused to believe it. What? One was asked to believe that there were a very tiny species of dog, not much bigger than my head even when it was full grown, and this dog, who must of course be a feeble creature, an artificial, weedy, brushed and curled fop by all accounts, incapable of making an honest jump, this dog was supposed, according to people's stories, to remain for the most part high up in the air, apparently doing nothing at all but simply resting there. No, to try and make me swallow such a thing were exploiting the simplicity of a young dog too outrageously, I told myself. But shortly afterwards I learned from another source an account of another overing dog. Could there be a conspiracy to fool me? But after that I saw the dog musicians with my own eyes, and from that day I considered everything possible. No prejudice is fettered upon my powers of apprehension. I investigated the most senseless rumours, following them as far as they could take me. And the most senseless seemed to me in this senseless world more probable than the sensible, and moreover particularly fertile for investigation. So it were too with the Overing dogs. I discovered a great many things about them. True, I have succeeded to this day in seeing none of them, but of their existence I have been firmly convinced for a long time, and they occupy an important place in my picture of the world. As usual, it is not, of course, that their technique that chiefly gives me to think. It is wonderful. Who can gainsay it? These dogs should be able to float in the air. In my amazed admiration for that, I am one with my fellow dogs. But far more strange to my mind is their senselessness, the senselessness of these existences. They have no relation whatever to the general life of the community. They hover in the air and that is all, and life goes on the usual way. Sometimes now and then refers to art and artists, but there it ends. But why, my good dogs, why on earth do these dogs float in the air? What sense is there in their occupation? Why can one get no word of explanation regarding them? Why do they hover up there, letting their legs, the pride of dogs, fall into desuetude? Desuetude? I don't know this. Desuetude. Preserving a detachment from the nourishing earth, reaping without having sown, being particularly well provided for, as I hear, and at the cost of the dog community too. I can flatter myself that my inquiries into these matters made some stir. People began to investigate after a fashion, to collect data. They made a beginning at least, although they are never likely to go further. But after all, that is something. And though the truth will not be discovered by such means, never can that stage be reached, yet they throw light on some of the profoundest ramifications of falsehood. For all the senseless phenomena of our existence, and the most senseless most of all, are susceptible of investigation. Not completely, of course, that is the diabolical part, but sufficiently to spare one painful questions. Take the Overing dogs once more as an example. They are not haughty as one might imagine at first, but rather particularly dependent upon their fellow dog. If one tries to put oneself in their place, one will see that. For they must do what they can do to obtain pardon, and not openly. That would be a violation of the obligation to keep silence. They must do what they can to obtain pardon for their way of life, or else divert attention from it so that it may be forgotten. And they do this, I have been told, by means of an almost unendurable volubility. They are perpetually talking, partly of their philosophical reflections, with which, seeing that they have completely renounced bodily exertion, they can continually occupy themselves, partly of the observations which they have made from their exalted stations, and although, as is very understandable considering their lazy existence, they are not much distinguished for intellectual power, and their philosophy is as worthless as their observations, and science can make hardly any use of their utterances. Besides, it is not reduced to draw assistance from such wretched sources. Nevertheless, if one asks what the Overing dogs are really doing, one will invariably receive the reply that they contribute a great deal of the knowledge. That is true, remarks someone, but their contributions are worthless and wearisome. The reply to that is a shrug or a change of the subject, or annoyance or laughter, and in a little while, when you ask again, you can learn once more that they contribute the knowledge. And finally, when you ask the question yourself, you will reply, if you are not careful, to the same effect. And perhaps indeed it is well not to be too obstinate, but to yield to public sentiment, to accept the extant Overing dogs, and without recognising their utter existence, which cannot be done, yet to tolerate them. I'm going to pause here for a moment because the ads are about to come on. So there is distinctly dog law. This isn't just pseudo-intellectual, or maybe it is. Maybe the point of a dog law is so that you can be pseudo-intellectual about it. I don't know. I just don't know. Right. Ads is now theoretically on, so there's no one here to talk to in theory. But then in practice, who can say whether anyone's here at all? So who's to say? But yeah, I've got 3 minutes to fill. So let's continue my reflections on this little text. Well, no, first let's have a drink of water and then we'll continue the reflections. So we're in the heart of another big chunk of pages and pages without a paragraph, which is maddening. This one's at least 3, I'll have to check the other page. And we've still got 20 pages to go, so I think we're about halfway through, what do you call it? Yeah, I think we're about halfway through the story, so I was probably a bit short with my hour and a half guess, but you know, probably about 2 hours, all told. I find stories like this quite annoying. Like, this is a complaint I've made before when I was reading The Famous Jumping Frogs of Calaveras County by Mark Twain. But sometimes you have these very, what do you call it, good authors who write things in a way that is deliberately annoying. And what they're doing when they do this is making fun of people who tell stories badly. But the problem is that by making fun of this, what they do is they engage in the behaviour that makes it annoying. And obviously in these cases it's meant to be like overdone to the extent that it's a parody, you know, it's a thing you laugh at, but I mean, like, I don't know. Maybe it would have been funnier back in the day, or in the original German or whatever, but really, I'm just reading this and I'm not, like, because it is just making fun of annoying pseudo-intellectualism, at least I think it is, it just drags on and it feels like it's a pseudo-intellectual text. But worse, because at least generally a pseudo-intellectual text is trying to say something and talk about real things, whereas this is talking about made-up dog stuff. So it feels very pointless. I mean, not entirely. Like, it's well written. There's a flow to it, although it's very, very heavy on the $20 words, but I don't know. It feels like I'm not getting as much out of it as I'm putting in, you know? Like, it takes more effort to get less out of it, which I don't know if that goes through when you're listening to someone else read it. Maybe you just have to put up with me being annoyed, but I don't know. It makes me question, you know? It's the problem with reading all these books. Even if these are all the ones that Lamp thinks are good, sometimes you're just going to get one that's not as good as the others. Or one that's really bad, like Whale, Dolphin and Gudgeon, which I still resent having a place on my shelves. But yeah. Don't know what to tell you, really. It's just, yeah. Anyway, with that, the ad break should be over. If it played at all, because I can never tell, so let's get back to it. And perhaps indeed it is well not to be too obstinate, but to yield the public sentiment, to accept the extant hover of dogs, and without recognising their right to existence, which cannot be done, yet to tolerate them. But more than this must not be required. That would be going too far. And yet the demand is made. We are perpetually being asked to put up with new hovering dogs who are always appearing. One does not even know where they come from. These dogs multiply by propagation. Have they actually the strength for that? For they are nothing much more than a beautiful coat of hair. And what is there in that to propagate? But even if that improbable continuity were possible, when could it take place? They are invariably seen alone, self-complacently floating on high up in the air, and if for once in a while they descend and take a run, it lasts only for a minute or two, a few minced and struts, and once more they turn back in strict solitude, absorbed in what is supposed to be profound thought, from which they, even when they exert themselves to the utmost, they cannot tear themselves free, or at least so they say. If the dogs do not propagate their kind, is it credible that there can be dogs who voluntarily give up life on the solid ground, voluntarily become hovering dogs, and merely for the sake of the comfort and a certain technical accomplishment, choose the empty life? Thanks, Abbe. I'll take a drink. Gotta look after yourself. I appreciate it. My Tamagotchi life, as it were. Voluntarily become hovering dogs, and merely for the sake of the comfort of and a certain technical accomplishment, choose that empty life on cushions up there. It is unthinkable. Neither propagation nor voluntary transition is thinkable. The facts, however, show that there are always new hovering dogs in evidence, from which one must conclude that, in spite of obstacles which appear insurmountable to our understanding, no dog species, however curious, ever dies out once it exists, or at least not without a tough struggle, not without being capable of putting up a successful defence for a long time. But if that is valid for such an out-of-the-way, externally odd, inefficient species as the hovering dog, must I not also accept it as valid for mine? Besides, I am not in the least queer outwardly. An ordinary middle-class dog, such as is very prevalent in this neighbourhood, at least. I am neither particularly exceptional in any way, nor particularly repellent in any way. And in my youth, and to some extent also in maturity, so long as I attend to my appearance, and had lots of exercise, I was actually considered a very handsome dog. My front view were particularly admired, my slim legs, the fine set of my head, but my silvery white and yellow coat, which coloured only at the hair tips, were very pleasing too. And all that there were nothing strange. The only strange thing about me is my nature. Even that, as I am always careful to remember, has its foundation in universal dog nature. Now, not even the hovering dogs live in isolation, but invariably manage to encounter their fellows somewhere or other in the great dog world, and even to conjure new generations of themselves out of nothingness. Then I too can live in the confidence that I am not quite forlorn. Certainly the fate of types like mine must be a strange one, and the existence of my colleagues can never be visible help to me, if for no other reason than that I should scarcely ever be able to recognise them. We other dogs were crushed by the silence, and long to break through it, literally to get a breath of fresh air. The others seem to thrive on silence. True, that is only so in appearance, as is in the case of the musical dogs, who ostensibly were quite calm when they played, but in reality were in a state of intense excitement. Nevertheless, the illusion is very strong. One tries to take a breath in it, but it mocks every attempt. What help then do my colleagues find? What kind of attempts do they make to manage to go on living in spite of everything? These attempts may be of various kinds. My own better question, and while I was young, were one. So I thought that perhaps if I associated with those who asked many questions, I might find my real comrades. Well, I did so for some time, with great self-control, a self-control made necessary by the annoyance I felt when I were interrupted by personal questions that I mostly could not answer myself. The only thing that concerns me is to obtain answers. Moreover, who is not eager to ask questions when he is young, and how, when so many questions are going about, are you to pick out the right questions? One question sounds like another. It is the intention that counts, but that is often hidden even from the questioner. And besides, it is a peculiarity of dogs to be always asking questions. They ask them confusedly altogether. Hey Naska, you've come in about halfway through Investigations of a Dog by Franz Kafka, and I'd love to give you a little summary of what's happened in it so far, but I'm not entirely clear on. I mean, so it's from the perspective of a dog, but like not a. It's fine. It's no problem being late. When I'm starting streaming an hour earlier than usual the last couple of days, but it's just a very weird text. Like so it's I guess it's the life story of a dog, but it's not like a dog who's like actually a dog. It's a dog who lives in a society of dogs, all of whom are intelligent and are also the only creatures in the world who are intelligent. And it's sort of like his philosophical ramblings on the life he's lived and the nature of I think it's meant to be sort of a piss take of like pseudo intellectual, like self-important writing, but it's just, I mean, it's a lot, man. I can't really give you a better summary than that, if I'm honest. Sort of bouncing off this one, but I'm determined to get through it. So yeah. Still, it's got some very funny words in it, so if you want to stick around for that. I'm trying to think if there's anything of particular relevance. So, actual narrative-wise, the narrator has told us when he was a young dog, he came across some dog musicians who stood on their hind legs and made very weird music, and that freaked him out. And it's led him to a life of making inquiries. And then he's talked about hovering dogs, which are a type of dog that do nothing all day but hover in the air and muse philosophically and see things that are far away, and which he claims are very useless, but that are a wide and continually appearing part of dog society, though he himself has never seen one. And now he's talking about how his quest for knowledge has led him to spend time amongst other dogs who asked a lot of questions, and that's where we're at. And that's been 20 pages, so I'm not... This is a very weird... I was going to say story, I'm not even sure I guess it's a story. I don't know. I sort of feel like I felt when I was reading Dubliners, where I know there's stuff I'm not getting out of this one. But unlike with Dubliners, which was really good and I was getting a lot out of anyway, I'm just not getting a lot out of this one. And I think there is more to get, but I'm not sure if it's worth enough, or if there's enough there to get that I would be willing to go back to it. So yeah. Still, we'll get through it and we'll see if there's anything more to it. But yeah, that's where we're at, as best as I can say. And besides, it is a peculiarity of dogs to always be asking questions. They ask them confusedly altogether. It is as if in doing that they were trying to obliterate every trace of the genuine questions. No, my real colleagues are not to be found among their youthful questioners, and just as little among the old and silent, to whom I now belong. But what good are all these questions, for they have failed me completely. Apparently my colleagues are cleverer dogs than I, and have recourse to other excellent methods that enable them to bear this life. Methods which nevertheless, as I can tell from my own experience, though they may perhaps help at a pinch, though they may calm, lull to rest, distract, and yet on the whole are impotent as my own, for no matter where I look, I can see no sign of their success. I am afraid that the last thing by which I can hope to recognise my real colleagues is their success. But where then are my real colleagues? Yes, that is the burden of my complaint. That is the kernel of it. Where are they? Everywhere and nowhere. Perhaps my next door neighbour, only 3 jumps away, is one of them. We often bark across to each other. He calls on me sometimes too, though I do not call on him. Is he my real colleague? I do not know. I certainly see no sign of it in him. But it is possible. It is possible, but all the same nothing is more improbable. When he is away I can amuse myself, drawn on my fancy, by discovering in him many things that have a suspicious resemblance to myself. Once he stands before me, all my fancies become ridiculous. An old dog, a little smaller even than myself, and I am hardly medium size, brown, short-haired, with a tired hang of the head and a shuffling gait. On top of all this, he trails his left hind leg behind him, a little because of some disease. For a long time now I've been more intimate with him than with anybody else. I am glad to say that I can still get on tolerably well with him, and when he goes away I shout the most friendly greetings after him, though not out of affection but in anger at myself. For if I followed him, I find him just as disgusting again, slinking along there with his trailing leg and his much too low hindquarters. Sometimes it seemed to me as if I were trying to humiliate myself by privately calling him my colleague. Nor in our talks does he betray any trace of similarity of thought. True, he is clever and cultured enough, as these things go here, and I could learn much from him. But is it for cleverness and culture that I am looking? We converse usually about local questions, and I am astonished. My isolation has made me more clear-sighted in such matters, and much intelligence is needed even by an ordinary dog, even in an average and not unfavourable circumstances, if he is to live out his life and defend himself against the greater of life's customary dangers. True, knowledge provides the rules one must follow, but even to grasp them imperfectly and in rough outline is by no means easy. And when one has actually grasped them, the real difficulty still remains, namely to apply them to local conditions. Here almost nobody can help. Almost every hour brings new tasks, and every new patch of earth its specific problems. No one can maintain that he has settled everything for good, and that henceforth his life will go on, so to speak, of itself. Not even I myself, though my needs shrink literally from day to day. And all this ceaseless labour, to what end? Merely to entomb oneself deeper and deeper in silence, it seems, so deep one can never be dragged out of it again by anybody. People often cry up the universal progress made by the dog, commonly throughout the age, and probably mean by the more particular common by the dog community throughout the age, and probably mean by that more particularly the progress in knowledge. Certainly knowledge is progressing, its advance is irresistible. It actually progresses at an accelerating speed, always faster. But what is there to praise in that? It is as if one were to praise someone because with the years he grows older, and in consequence comes nearer and nearer to death with increasing speed. That is a natural, moreover an ugly process, in which I find nothing to praise. I can only see decline everywhere, in saying which, however, I do not mean that earlier generations were essentially better than ours, but only younger. That were their greatest advantage. Their memory were not so overburdened as ours is today. It were easier to get them to speak out, and even if nobody actually succeeded in doing that, the possibility of it were greater, and it is indeed this greater sense of possibility that moves us so deeply when we listen to those old and strangely simple stories. Here and there we catch a curious, significant phrase, and we would almost like to leap to our feet, if we did not feel the weight of centuries upon us. No, whatever objection I may have to my age, former generations were not better. Indeed, in a sense they were far worse, far weaker. Even in those days wonders did not openly walk the street for anyone to seize. But all the same, dogs, I cannot put it in any other way, had not yet become so doggish as today. The edifice of dogdom was still loosely put together. The true word could still have intervened, planning or replanning the structure, changing it at will, transforming it into its opposite. And the word were there, or very near at least, on the tip of everyone's tongue. Anyone might have hit upon it. And what has become of it today? Today one may pluck out one's very art and not find it. Our generation is lost. It may be, but it is more blameless than the earlier ones. I can understand the hesitation of our generation. Indeed, it is no longer mere hesitation. It is the thousandth forgetting of a dream dreamt 1,000 times and forgotten 1,000 times. And who can damn us merely for forgetting the 1,000th time? But I fancy I understand the hesitation of our forefathers too. We would probably have acted just as they did. Indeed, I could almost say, well for us that it were not we who had to strike the guilt upon us, that instead we can hasten in almost guiltless silence towards the deathful world darkened by others. Wait, is this dog talking about climate change? What the hell? When our first fathers strayed, they had doubtless scarcely any notion that their aberration were to be an endless one. They could still literally see the crossroads. It seemed an easy matter to turn back whenever they pleased, and if they hesitated to turn back, it were merely because they wanted to enjoy a dog's life for a little while longer. It were not yet a genuine dog's life, and already it seemed intoxicatingly beautiful to them. So what must it become in a little while, a very little while? And so they strayed further. They did not know what we can now guess at, contemplating the course of history. That change begins in the soul before it appears on ordinary existence, and that when they began to enjoy a dog's life, they must already have possessed a real old dog's souls, and were by no means so near the starting point as they thought, whereas their eyes, feasting on all doggish jaws, tried to persuade them. But who can speak of youth at this time of day? These were the really young dogs, but their sole ambition, unfortunately, were to become old dogs, truly a thing which they could not fail to achieve, as all succeeding generations show, and ours, the last, most clearly of all. Naturally, I do not talk to my neighbour of these things. Yet often I cannot but think of them when I am sitting opposite him, that typical old dog, or burying my nose in his coat, which already has a whiff of the smell of cast-off irons. To talk to him, or even any of the others, about such things would be pointless. I know what course the conversation would take. He would urge a slight objection now and then, but finally he would agree. Agreement is the best weapon of defence, and the matter would be buried. Why indeed trouble to exhume it at all? And in spite of this, there is a profound understanding between my neighbour and me, going deeper than mere words. I shall never cease to maintain that, though I have no proof of it, and perhaps am merely suffering from an ordinary delusion caused by the fact that for a long time this dog has been the only one with whom I have held any communication, and so I am bound to cling to him. Are you after all my colleague in your own fashion, and ashamed because everything is miscarried with you? Look, the same fate has been mine. When I am alone I weep over it. Come, it is sweet to weep in company. I often have such thoughts as these, and I give him a prolonged look. He does not lower his glance, but neither can one read anything from it. He gazes at me dully, wondering why I am silent and why I have broken off the conversation. But perhaps that very glance is his way of questioning me, and I disappoint him just as he disappoints me. In my youth, if other problems had not been more important to me then, had I not been perfectly satisfied with my own company, I would probably have asked him straight out, and received an answer flatly, agreeing with me, and that would have been worse even than today's silence. But is not everybody silent in exactly the same way? What is there to prevent me from believing that everyone is my colleague, instead of thinking that I have only one or two fellow inquirers, lost and forgotten along with their petty achievements, so that I can never reach them by any road through the darkness of ages or the confused throng of the present? Why not believe that all dogs from the beginning of time have been my colleagues, all diligent in their own way, all unsuccessful in their own way, all silent or falsely garrulous in their own way, as hopeless researchers have to make one? But in that case I need not have severed myself from my fellows at all. I could have remained quietly among the others. I had no need to fight my way out like a stubborn child through closed ranks of grown-ups, who indeed wanted as much as I to find a way out, and who seemed incomprehensible to me simply because of their knowledge, which told them that nobody could ever escape, and that it was stupid to use force. Gonna take a drink there. Oh, but there are a lot of run-on sentences in this. I'm not going to do commentary now. I'm going to press on the end and then do a big chunk, I think. Such ideas, however, are definitely due to the influence of my neighbour. He confuses me. He fills me with dejection, and yet in himself he is happy enough. At least when he is in his own quarters, I often hear him shouting and singing. He is really unbearable. It would be a good thing to renounce this last tie also, to cease giving way to the grey dreams which all contact with dogs unavoidably provokes, no matter how ardent one may consider oneself, and to imply the short time that still remains for me exclusively in prosecuting my researches. The next time he comes I shall slip away, or pretend I'm asleep, and keep up the pretense until he stops visiting me. Also my researches have become intermittent. I relax, I grow weary. I trot mechanically where once I raced enthusiastically. Think of the time when I began to inquire into the questions. Whence does the earth procure this food? Then indeed I really lived among the people. I pushed my way where the crowd was thickest, wanted everybody to know my work, and be my audience, and my audience were even more essential to me than my work. I still expected to produce some effect or other, and that naturally gave me a great impetus, which now that I am solitary is gone. But in those days I was so full of strength that I achieved something unprecedented, something at variance with all our principles, and that every contemporary eyewitness assuredly recalls now as an uncanny feat. Our scientific knowledge, which generally makes for an extreme specialisation, is remarkably simple in one province. I mean where it teaches that the earth engenders our food, and then after having laid down this hypothesis, gives the methods by which the different foods may be obtained in the best kinds and greatest abundance. Now it is of course true that the earth brings forth all food. Of that there can be no doubt, but as simple as people generally imagine it to be, the matter is not, and their belief that it is simple prevents further inquiry. Take an ordinary occurrence that happens every day. If we were to be quite inactive, as I am almost completely now, and after a perfunctory scratching and watering of the soil laid down and waiting for what would come, then we should find the food on the ground, assuming that a result of some kind is inevitable. Nevertheless, that is not what usually happens. Those who have preserved even a little freedom of judgment on scientific matters, and their numbers are truly small, for science draws a wider and wider circle around itself, will easily see, without having to make any specific experiment, that the main part of the food that is discovered on the ground, in such cases, comes from above. Indeed, customarily we snap up most of our food, according to our dexterity and greed, before it has reached the ground at all. In saying that, however, I am saying nothing against science. The earth, of course, brings forth this kind of food too. Whether the earth draws one kind of food out of itself and cools down another kind from the skies perhaps makes no essential difference, and science, which has established that in both cases it is necessary to prepare the ground, need not perhaps concern itself with such distinctions. But does it not say, if you have food in your jaws you have solved all questions for the time being? But it seems to me that science nevertheless takes a veiled interest, at least to some extent, in these matters, inasmuch as it recognises two chief methods of procuring food, namely the actual preparation of the ground, and secondly the auxiliary perfecting process of incantation, dance and song. I find here a distinction in accordance with the one I have myself made, not a definitive distinction perhaps, but yet clear enough. The scratchings and watering of the ground, in my opinion, serves to produce both kinds of food, and remain indispensable Incantation, dance and song, however, are concerned less with the ground food in the narrower sense, and serve principally to attract the food from above. Tradition fortifies me in this interpretation. The ordinary dog themselves set science right here without knowing it, and without science being able to venture a word in reply. If, the science claims, these ceremonies minister only to the soil, giving it the potency, let us say, to attract food from the air, then logically they should be directed exclusively to the soil. It is the soil that the incantations must be whispered to, the soil that must be danced to, and to the best of my knowledge, science ordains nothing else than this. But now comes the remarkable thing. The people, in all their ceremonies, gaze upwards. This is no insult to the science, and science does not forbid it, but leaves the husbandman the complete freedom, in this respect. In its teaching it takes only the soil into account, and if the husbandman carries out its instructions concerning the preparation of the ground in it, he is content. Yet in my opinion it should really demand more than this, if it's logical, and though I have never been deeply initiated into science, I simply cannot conceive how the learned can bear to let our people, unruly and passionate as they are, chant their incantations with their faces turned upwards, wail our ancient folk songs into the air, and spring high in their dances as though, forgetting the ground, they wish to take flight from it forever. I took this contradiction as my starting point, and wherever, according to those teachings of science, the harvest time were approaching, I restricted my attention to the ground. It was the ground that I scratched in the dance, and I almost gave myself a crick in the neck, keeping my head as close to the ground as I could. Later I dug an hole for my nose and sang and declaimed into it so that only the ground might hear, and nobody else beside or above me. The result of my experiments were meagre. Sometimes the food did not appear, and I was already preparing to rejoice at this proof, but then the food would appear. It was exactly as if my strange performance had caused some confusion at first, but had shown itself later to possess advantages, so that in my case the usual barking and leaping could be dispensed with. Often indeed the food appeared in greater abundance than formerly, but then again it would stay away altogether. With a diligence hitherto unknown in a young dog, I drew up exact reports of all my experiments, fancied that here and there I were on a scent that might lead me further, but then lost itself again in obscurity. My inadequate grounding in science also undoubtedly held me up here. What guarantee had I, for instance, that the absence of the food were not caused by unscientific preparation of the ground, rather than by my experiments? And if that should be so, then all my conclusions were invalid. In certain circumstances I might have been able to achieve an almost scrupulously exact experiment, namely if I succeeded only once in bringing down food by an upward incantation without preparing the ground at all, and then had failed to extract food by an incantation directed exclusively to the ground. I attempted indeed something of this kind, but without any real belief in it, without conditions being quite perfect, for it is my fixed opinion that a certain amount of ground preparation is always necessary, and even if the heretics who deny this are right, their theory can never be proved in any case, seeing that the watering of the ground is done under a kind of compulsion, and within certain limits simply cannot be avoided. Another, and somewhat tangential experiment succeeded better and aroused some public attention. Arguing from the customary method of snatching food while it is still in the air, I decided to allow the food to fall to the ground, but to make no effort to snatch it. Accordingly, I always made a small jump in the air when the food appeared, but timed it so that it might always fail of its object. In the majority of instances, the food fell dully and indifferently to the ground in spite of this, and I flung myself furiously upon it, with the fury both of hunger and of disappointment. But in isolated cases something else happened, something really strange. The food did not fall, but followed me through the air. The food pursued the hungry. That never went on for long, always only for a short stretch. Then the food fell after all, or vanished completely, or, the most common case, my greed put a premature end to the experiment, and I swallowed down the tempting bait. All the same, I were happy at that time. A stir of curiosity ran through my neighbourhood. I attracted uneasy attention. I found my acquaintances more accessible to my questions. I could see in their eyes a gleam that seemed like an appeal for help, and even if it were only the reflection of my own glance, I asked for nothing more. I was satisfied, until at last I discovered, and the others discovered it simultaneously, that this experiment of mine, a commonplace of science, had already succeeded with others far more brilliantly than with me, and though it had not been attempted for a long time on account of the extreme self-control it required, had also no need to be repeated, for scientifically it had no value at all. I only proved what were already known, that the ground not only attracts food vertically from above, but also at a slant, indeed sometimes in spirals. So there I were left with my experiment, for I was not discouraged. I was too young for that. On the contrary, this disappointment braced me to attempt perhaps the greatest achievement of my life. I did not believe the scientist's depreciations of my experiment, yet belief was of no avail here, but only proof, and I resolved to set about establishing that, and thus raise my experiment from its original irrelevance and set it in the very centre of the field of research. I wish to prove that when I retreat before the food, it was not the ground that attracts it at a slant, but I who drew it after me. The first experiment, it is true, I could not carry any further. To see the food before one and experiment in a scientific spirit at the same time, one cannot keep that up indefinitely. But I decided to do something else. I resolved to fast completely, as long as I could stand it, and at that same time avoid all sight of food, all temptations. If I was to withdraw myself in this manner, remain lying day and night with closed eyes, trouble myself neither to snatch food from the air nor lift it from the ground, and if, as I dared not expect, yet faintly hoped, without taking any of the customary measures, and merely in response to the unavoidable irrational watering of the ground, and the quiet recitation of the incantations and songs, the dance I wished to omit so as not to weaken my powers, the food would have come of itself from above, and without going near the ground would have knocked at my teeth for admittance. If that would have happened, then even if science were not confuted, for it has enough elasticity to admit that exceptions in isolated cases, I asked myself what will the other dogs say, who fortunately do not possess such extreme elasticity. But this would be no exceptional case like those handed down by history, such as the incident, let's say, of the dog who refuses because of bodily illness or troubled mind to repair the ground, to track down and seize his food, upon which the old dog community recite magical formulae, and by this means succeed in making the food deviate from its customary route into the jaws of that invalid. I, on the contrary, were perfectly sound at the height of my powers, my appetite so splendid that it prevented me all day from thinking of anything but itself. I submitted, moreover, whether it be credited or not, voluntarily to my period of fasting, with myself quite able to conjure down my own supply of food, and wished also to do so, and so I asked no assistance from the dog community, and indeed rejected it in the most determined manner. I sought a suitable place for myself in an outlying clump of bushes, where I would have to listen to no talk of food, no sound of munching jaws and bones being gnawed. I ate my fill for the last time and laid me down. As far as possible, I wanted to pass my old time with closed eyes. Until the food came, it would be a potential night for me, even though my vigil might last for days or weeks. During that time, however, I dared not sleep much. Better indeed if I did not sleep at all, and that made everything much harder, for I must not only conjure the food down from the air, but also be on my guard lest I should be asleep when it arrived. Yet on the other hand, sleep would be very welcome to me, for I would manage to fast much longer asleep than awake. For those reasons I decided to arrange my time prudently, and slept a great deal, but always in short snatches. I achieved this by always resting my head while I slept on some frail twig, which soon snapped and so awoke me. So there I lay, sleeping or keeping watch, dreaming or singing quietly to myself. My first vigils passed uneventfully. Perhaps in the place whence the food came, no one had yet noticed that I was lying there in resistance to the normal course of things, and so there were no sign. I was a little disturbed in my concentration by the fear the other dogs might miss me, presently find me, and attempt something or other against me. My second fear was that the mere wetting of the ground, or unfruitful ground according to the finding of the science, some chance nourishment might appear and seduce me by a smell. But for a time nothing of that kind happened, and I could go on fasting. Apart from such fears, I was more calm during this first stage than I could remember ever having been before. Although in reality I was labouring to annul the findings of science, I felt within me a deep reassurance, indeed almost the proverbial serenity of the scientific worker. In my thoughts I begged forgiveness of science. There must be room in it for my researches too. Consoling in my ears rang the assurance that no matter how great the effect of my inquiries might be, and indeed the greater the better, I would not be lost to ordinary dog life. Science regarded my attempts with benevolence. It itself would undertake the interpretation of my discoveries, and that promise already meant fulfilment. While until now I had felt outlawed in my innermost heart, and had run my head against the traditional rules of my species like a savage, I would now be accepted with great honour. The long yearned for warmth of assembled canine bodies would lap me around. I would ride uplifted high on the shoulders of my fellows. Remarkable effect to my first hunger. My achievement seemed so great to me that I began to weep with emotion and self-pity. There among the quiet bushes, which it must be confessed were not very understandable, when I were looking forward to my well-earned rewards, why should I weep? Probably pure happiness. It is always when I am happy, and that is seldom enough that I weep. After that, however, these feelings soon passed. My beautiful fancies fled one by one before the increasing urgency of my hunger. A little longer and I was, after an abrupt farewell to all my imagination and my sublime feelings, totally alone with the hunger burning in my entrails. That is my hunger, I told myself countless times during this stage, as if I wanted to convince myself that my hunger and I were still two things, and I could shake it off like a burdensome lover. But in reality we were very painfully one, and when I explained to myself, that is my hunger, it was really my hunger that was speaking, and having its joke at my expense. A bad, bad time. I still shudder to think of it, and not merely please note this on account of the suffering I endured then, but because I know I was insufficiently equipped then, and consequently shall have to live through the suffering once more if I am ever to achieve anything. For today I still hold fasting to be the final and most potent weapon of research. The way goes through fasting, the highest if it is attainable, is attainable only by the highest effort, and the highest effort among us is voluntary fasting. So when I think of those times, I will gladly pass my life in brooding over them. I cannot help thinking also of the time that still threatens me. It seems to me that it takes almost a lifetime to recuperate from such an attempt. My whole life as an adult lies between me and that fast, and I have not recovered yet. When I begin upon my next fast, I shall perhaps have more resolution than the first time, because of my greater experience and deeper insight into the need for the attempt. For my powers are still enfeebled by that first essay, and so I shall probably begin to fail at the mere approach of the familiar horrors. My weaker appetite will not help me. It will reduce the value of the attempt only by a very little, and will indeed probably force me to fast longer than was necessary for the first time. I think I am clear on these and many other matters. The long intervals have not been wanting in trial attempts. Often enough I have literally gotten my teeth into hunger. But I was still not strong enough for the ultimate effort, and now the unspoiled ardour of youth is of course gone forever. I'm going to take a quick pause here in the middle of the paragraph to take a drink because my throat's starting to bug me. And now the unspoiled ardour of youth is of course gone forever. It vanished in the great privations of that first fast. All sorts of thoughts tormented me. Our forefathers appeared threateningly before me. Oop. Fair enough, yeah, good idea, Nazca. Gotta look after myself. Lord. The problem with reading books is that you do have to sort of hunch over to look at them, and it is important to straighten your back out occasionally, so thank you for that. But we're almost done now, so only about 5 more pages. Oh, but that was a good one. Got a click out of my neck there. Whew, appreciate it. Right. Now what we're doing. Our forefathers appeared threateningly before me. True, I held them responsible for everything, even if I dared not say so openly. It were they who involved our dog life in guilt, and so I could easily have responded to their menaces with counter-menaces. But I bow before their knowledge. It comes from sources of which we know no longer, and for that reason, much as I may feel compelled to oppose them, I shall never actually overstep their laws, but content myself with wriggling out through the gaps, for which I have a particularly good nose. On the question of fasting, I appealed to the well-known dialogue in the course of which one of our sages once expressed the intention of forbidding fasting, but were dissuaded by a second with the words, "But who would ever think of fasting?" Whereupon the first sage allowed to himself to be persuaded, and withdrew the prohibition. But now arises the question, is not fasting really forbidden after all? The great majority of commentators deny this, and regard fasting as freely permitted, and older as they think with the second sage, do not worry in the least about some of the evil consequences that may result from erroneous interpretations. I naturally assured myself of this point before I began my fast, but now that I was twisted with the pangs of hunger, and in my distress of mind sought relief in my own hind legs, despairingly licking and gnawing on them, up to the very bugs, the universal interpretation of this dialogue seemed to me entirely and completely false. I cursed the commentator's science. I cursed myself for having been led astray by it. The dialogue contained, as any child could see, more than merely one prohibition of fasting. The first sage wished to forbid fasting. What a sage wishes is already done, so fasting were forbidden. As for the second sage, he not only agreed with the first, but actually considered fasting impossible. Applied therefore upon the first prohibition a second, that of dog nature itself. The first sage saw this, and thereupon withdrew the explicit prohibition. That was to say, he imposed upon all dogs, the matter being now settled, the obligation to know themselves and to make their own prohibitions regarding fasting. So here were a threefold prohibition instead of merely one, and I had violated it. Now I could have at least obeyed at this point, though tardily. In the midst of pain I felt a longing to go on fasting, and I followed it as greedily as if it were a strange dog. I could not stop. Perhaps too I was already too weak to get up and seek safety for myself in familiar scenes. I tossed about on the fallen forest leaves. I could no longer sleep. I heard noises on every side. The world, which had been asleep during my life hitherto, seemed to have been awakened by my fasting. I was tortured by the fancy that I would never be able to eat again. I must eat so as to reduce to silence this world rioting so noisily round me, and I would never be able to do so. The greatest noise of all come from my own belly. I often laid my ear against it with startled eyes, for I could hardly believe what I heard. And now that things were becoming unendurable, my very nature seemed to be seized by the general frenzy, and made senseless attempts to save itself. The smell of food began to assail me, delicious dainties that I had long since forgotten, delights of my childhood. Yes, I could smell the very fragrance of my mother's treats. I forgot my resolution to resist all smells, or rather I did not forget it. I dragged myself to and fro, never for more than a few yards, and sniffed as if that were in accordance with my resolution, as if I were looking for food simply to be on my guard against it. The fact that I found nothing did not disappoint me. The food must be there, only we were always a few steps away. My legs failed me before I could reach it. But simultaneously I knew that nothing was there, and that I made those feeble movements simply out of fear lest I might collapse in this place and ne'er be able to leave it. My last hopes, my last dreams vanished. I would perish here miserably, and what use were my researches, childish attempts undertaken in childish and far happier days? Here and now were the hour of deadly earnest, here my inquiries should have shown their value, but where had they vanished? Only a dog lay here, hopelessly snapping at the empty air, a dog who, though he still watered the ground with convulsive haste at short intervals, and without being aware of it, could not remember even the shortest of the countless incantations stored in his memory, not even the little rhymes which the newborn puppy says when it snuggles under its mother. It seemed to me as if I was separated from all my fellows, not by a quite short stretch, but by an infinite distance, and as if I would die less of hunger than of neglect, for it was clear that nobody troubled about me, nobody beneath the earth, on it or above it. I would die under their indifference. They said indifferently, "He is dying," and it would actually come to pass. And did I not myself assent? Did I not say the same thing? Had I not wanted to be forsaken like this? Yes, brothers, but not so as to perish in that place, but to achieve truth and escape from this world of falsehood, where there is no one from whom you can learn the truth, not even from me, born as I am a citizen of falsehood. Perhaps the truth were not so very far off, and I not so forsaken. Perhaps the truth, therefore, as I thought, or I may have been forsaken less by my fellows than by myself, in yielding and consenting to die. But one does not die so easily as a nervous dog imagines. I merely fainted, and when I come to and raised my eyes, a strange hound was standing before me. I did not feel hungry, but rather filled with strength, and my limbs, it seemed to me, were light and agile, though I made no attempts to prove this by getting on my feet. My visual faculties in themselves were no keener than usual. A beautiful, but not at all extraordinary hound stood before me. I could see that, and that were all, and yet it seemed to me that I saw something more in him. There was blood under me. At first I took it for food, but I recognised it immediately as blood that I had vomited. I turned my eyes from it to the strange hound. He was lean, long-legged, brown, with a patch of white here and there, and had a fine, strong, piercing gaze. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "You must leave this place." "I can't leave it just now," I said, without trying to explain, for how could I explain everything to him? Besides, he seemed to be in a hurry. "Please go away," he said impatiently, lifting his feet and setting them down again. "Let me be," I said. "Leave me to myself and don't worry about me. The others don't." "I ask you to go for your own sake," he said. "You can ask for any reason you like," I replied. "I can't go even if I wanted to." "You need have no fear of that," he said, smiling. "You can go all right. It's because you seem to be feeble that I ask you to go now, and you can go slowly if you like. If you linger now, you'll have to race off later on." "That's my affair," I replied. "It's mine too," he said, saddened by my stubbornness. He obviously resolved to let me laugh for the time being, but at the same time to seize upon the opportunity of paying court to me. Any other time I would gladly submit to the blandishments of such a beautiful creature. At the moment, why I cannot tell, the thoughts filled me with terror. "Get out!" I screamed, and all the louder as I had no other means of protecting myself. "All right, I'll leave you then," he said slowly, retreating. "You're wonderful. Don't I please me?" "You're wonderful. Don't I please you?" "You'll please me by going away and leaving me in peace," I said. But I was no longer so sure of myself as I tried to make him think. My senses, sharpened by fasting, suddenly seemed to see or hear something about him. It was just beginning, it would grow and it came nearer, and I knew this hound had the power to drive me away, even if I could not imagine to myself at the moment how or ever to get to my feet. And I gazed at him. He had merely shaken his head sadly at my rough answer, without a mountain desire. "Who are you?" I asked. "I'm a hunter," he replied. "Hey, Tanner. Oh yeah, the Artec one. I've forgotten about that." "Who are you?" I asked.
"Oh, the rat!"
Yeah, good to have you here, Tanner. I do appreciate it. We're near the end of Kafka's Investigations of a Dog, which has been a very strange text. And our narrator, after telling us about his life of inquiries, explains how he has gone through the greatest hardship a dog can endure, that of voluntary fasting, and after passing out has been resuscitated, being stood over by a strange but oddly gorgeous hound, whom he is currently speaking with, but has grown to have a mortal terror for some reason that we do not yet know. "Who are you?" I asked. "I'm a hunter," he replied. "And why won't you let me lie here?" I asked. "You disturb me," he said. "I can't hunt while you're here." "Try," I said. "Perhaps you'll be able to hunt after all." "No," he said. "I'm sorry, but you must go." "Don't hunt for this one day," I implored him. "No," he said. "I must hunt." "I must go. You must hunt," I said. "Nothing but musts. Can you explain to me why we must?" "No," replied he. "But there's nothing that needs to be explained. These are natural, self-evident things." "Not quite so evident as all that," I said. "You're sorry that you must drive me away, and yet you do it." "That's so," he replied. "That's so," I echoed him crossly. "That isn't an answer. Which sacrifice would you rather make? Give up your hunting or to give up driving me away?" "To give up my hunting," he said without hesitation. "There," said I. "Don't you see that you're contradicting yourself?" "How am I contradicting myself?" he replied. "My dear little dog, can it really not... My dear little dog, can it really be that you don't understand that I must? Don't you understand the most self-evident fact?" I made no answer, for I noticed a new life ran through me, life such as terror gives. I noticed from almost invisible indications, which perhaps nobody but myself could have noticed. In the depth of his chest, the hound was preparing to upraise a song. "You're going to sing?" I said. "Yes," he replied gravely. "I am going to sing soon, but not yet." "You're beginning already?" I said. "No," he said. "Not yet, but be prepared. I can hear it already, though." "You deny it?" I said, trembling. He was silent, and then I thought I saw something such as no dog before me had ever seen. At least there is no slightest hint of it in our tradition. And I hastily bowed my head in infinite fear and shame in the pool of blood lying before me. I thought I saw that hound was already singing without knowing it. Nay, more, the melody separated from him, were floating on the air in accordance with its own laws, and as though he had no part in it, were moving towards me alone. Today, of course, I deny the validity of all such perceptions, and ascribed them to my overexertion at the time. But even if it was an error, it had nevertheless a sort of grandeur, and is the sole, even if delusive reality that I have carried over into this world from our period of fasting, and shows at least how far we can go when we are beyond ourselves. And I were actually quite beyond myself. In ordinary circumstances I would have been very ill, incapable of moving, but the melody, which the hound soon seemed to acknowledge as his, was quite irresistible. It grew stronger and stronger. Its waxing power seemed to have no limits, and already almost burst my eardrums. But the worst of it was that it seemed to exist solely for my sake. This voice, before whose sublimity the woods fell silent, to exist solely for my sake. Who was I, that I could dare remain here, lying brazenly before it in my pool of blood and filth? I tottered at my feet and looked down at myself. This wretched body could never run. I still had time to think, but already, spurned on by the melody, I was careening from the spot in splendid style. I said nothing to my friends. Probably I could have told them all when I first arrived, but I was too feeble, and later it seemed to me that such things could not be told. Hints which I could not refrain from occasionally dropping were quite lost in the general conversation. For the rest, I recovered physically in a few hours, but spiritually I still suffer from the effects of that experiment. Nevertheless, I next carried on my research into music. True science had not been idle in this sphere either. The science of music, if I am correctly informed, is perhaps still more comprehensive than that of literature, and in any case established on a firmer basis. That may be explained by the fact that this province admits of more objective inquiry than the other, and its knowledge is more a matter of pure observation and systematization, while the province of food, the main object is to achieve practical results. That is the reason why the science of music is accorded greater esteem than that of nature, but also why the former has never penetrated so deeply into the life of the people. I myself felt less attracted to the science of music than to any other, until I heard that voice in the forest. My experience with the musical dog had indeed drawn my attention to music, but I was still too young at that time. Nor is it by any means easy even to come up to grips with that science. It is regarded as very esoteric, and politely excludes the crowd. Besides, although what struck me most deeply at first about these dogs was their music, their silence still seemed to me still more significant. As for their frightening music, probably it were quite unique, so that I could leave it out of account.
Right.
Hey Wild, good to have you. We're just finishing up Tales of a Dog. Appreciate it. But thenceforth their silence confronted me everywhere, and in all the dogs I met. So for penetrating in the wheel, yeah, no worries at all. We're just about finished, but I'm just going to get to the end and do my little summary, so you're more than welcome, I appreciate it. So for penetrating in the real dog nature, researching the food seemed to me the best method, calculated to lead my goal by the straightest path. Perhaps I was mistaken. A border region between these two sciences, however, had already attracted my attention. I mean the theory of incantation, by which food is called down. Here again it is very much against me that I have never seriously tackled the science of music, and in this sphere cannot even count myself among the half-educated, the class on whom science looks down most of all. This fact I cannot get away from. I could not. I have proof of that, unfortunately. I could not pass even the most elementary scientific examination set by an authority on the subject. Of course, quite apart from the circumstances already mentioned, the reason for that could be found in my incapacity for scientific investigation, my limited powers of thought, my bad memory, but above all in my inability to keep my scientific aim continuously before my eyes. All this I frankly admit, even with a certain degree of pleasure, for the more profound cause of my scientific incapacity seems to me an instinct, and indeed by no means a bad one. If I wanted to brag, I might say that it was this very instinct that invalidated my scientific capacities, for it would surely be a very extraordinary thing if one who shows a tolerable degree of intelligence in dealing with the ordinary daily business of life, which certainly cannot be called simple, and moreover one whose findings have been checked and verified, where that was possible, by individual scientists, if not by science itself, should a priori be incapable of planting his paw even on the first rung of the ladder of science. It was this instinct that made me, and perhaps for the sake of science itself, but a different science from that of the day, an ultimate science, prized freedom higher than everything else. Freedom. Certainly such freedom as is possible today is a wretched business, but nevertheless freedom, nevertheless a possession. And that's the end of Investigations of a Dog. That was a very strange one. And it ran quite a bit longer than I expected. But well, let's go over it as best we can, shall we? So yeah, very odd. It's weird. I said earlier that I thought it was sort of a parody of like pseudo-intellectual rambling texts. And I do think there's something to that, but then there's so much about it that is distinctly sort of esoteric. It almost feels like a sort of Lovecraftian text, like the sort of thing that would be describing an alien existence or point of view. There's definitely something going on here. These dogs live in a world where they sustain themselves by scratching at the ground and water in it, which I assume means peeing on the ground, and then singing and incanting, and food appears from the ground or from the air. I almost, in my head, I'm like, well, is this maybe like some metaphor for, like, you know, they're in like a kennel or an artificial environment? Is it a sci-fi story in that way? But I don't see it how it could be. And then there's the singers, these singing dogs that they appear in the start of the story and then at the end with the hunting dog. There's all these elements that sort of don't come together. I mean, you can paint it as absurdist, maybe it's not meant to mean anything, but there are distinct themes as well. Inquiry and the nature of society and the feeling of being alone. Like the way this dog talks about being a part of society as a dog, it makes me feel like it is an allegory for autism or some other neurodivergence. Maybe ADHD would be a better comparison. But I get this was written at like the turn of the 20th century, so I don't think it's that well developed an idea. So maybe it is just something personal to Kafka. I'm going to have a drink now because I realise my throat is giving me grief and I don't want to wreck it. But yeah, it's odd. Especially the way it talks about science sort of strikes me, and I'm wondering if that is a product of the time it was written at. Because, I mean, obviously the sort of early 1900s were a very sort of significant period of modernisation and change. You know, factories becoming more prevalent. This sort of divorce from agrarian society, which, I mean, already you'd had the Industrial Revolution that made people move away from it. But even then, their lives are sort of less governed by science. But at the sort of turn of the 90s, you start to have the standardisation of indoor plumbing and the sort of introduction of electricity. Radio's becoming bigger, you know? The lead up to the First World War, all these sort of signs of more developed modernisation and detachment from the older sort of way of living. And there's a distinct metaphor in there of like the dog thing, right? Well, I don't think it's explicitly stated, but he mentions the early dogs just coming in from the crossroads, moving down the path of dogdom, wanting to become dogs. And I think that's meant to be like the idea of, you know, a dog becoming a dog after having been a wolf, something that London covers a lot. The idea of becoming tame, becoming this domesticated animal. And I guess as a metaphor for man becoming a civilised animal, but a different sort of civilised animal, a modern animal. I don't know, really. There's a lot. Ugh. It's annoying when you read a book like this and you just know that there's more to it you're not getting. I mentioned earlier on that it reminded me of when I was reading Dubliners, but I still got a lot out of Dubliners and I didn't feel like I was getting a lot out of this. And towards the second half of it, I got more out of it. But I don't know, I'm sort of torn. Like, yeah. I mean, the nature of doghood, like, it's something that London covers a lot very well. Like, Call of the Wild is very famous for it. The sort of dog that becomes a wolf, and obviously a White Fang is sort of the inverse of that. Wolf becoming a dog. But, I don't know. In London, it feels a lot more literal, whereas here it's clearly a metaphor of some sort. I mean, this whole thing has got to be deeply metaphorical. Oh, it looks like ads might be about to start. I never know if ads are actually coming on or not, because I know people have said they don't. I sort of feel like I should pause in the discussion and let people get through the ads if they are ads. But then I feel like I'm breaking up for the people if there aren't ads, so I'm torn. But yeah, I'll take a moment to have another drink, and then you can tell me if you're out of the ads. You can hear me saying things. And there goes the last of my water. Right. Okay, so I'm assuming by the fact that no one has said anything. Oh no, no ads there. Okay. I don't understand how the ad things work. I set it up so that it won't. It'll play the ads at a regular thing, and it won't do the pre-roll ads. But then it doesn't play ads half the time. I don't know. I guess that's actually also kind of relevant to this text. It talks about how a modern dog, or the life of a modern dog, is no way simple, right? All these things that you have to do in the society to make it complicated. You have to have an intelligent mind, the amount of intelligence required just to get by in the world. And that's true here too. You have all these things that come together. To understand any system, you have to understand more and more different things, disparate elements. And in that way, I suppose, you have the idea of a life that is detached from, simplicity. An idea of a life that is... how'd you put it? Not really sure what I'm trying to say here. An idea of a life that is complicated, fundamentally. You can't have a life that's really simple anymore, can you? There's no way of living a basic agrarian existence, of being a subsistence farmer. We live in a world where everyone is required to do more and more things. It was, I don't remember where I read it, but there was something someone said that struck me a while back. And that is, every time that you become required to do something to function in society, more and more people become disabled. Like today in the world, you can't function without being able to read and write. You have to do that to, fill out forms and stuff. And so anyone who can't read and write, in a world before where they would get along fine, where it was only an occasional thing that you'd get by without, the need for it means that everyone who can't do it is disabled. The same is true of driving, especially in America, where cars are pretty prevalent in everyday life. To be able to maintain employment in a lot of the world, you need to be able to drive. So people who aren't able to drive, for whatever reason, are disabled, when before they might have been able to function perfectly well. And in that way, I guess that's what the doghood here, or at least metaphor to my mind, is, right? Every step you make down this path, every way that the nature of doghood becomes more ingrained, you become more detached. More people or more dogs fall out of it. The more things that become necessary to be a functional member of society, the less anyone is able to be a functional member. It's strange. But then you have the idea of the hovering dog. I've got no idea what that was about at all. This whole thing feels like it's very esoteric, like there's a lot of, I don't know, meaning here that is hidden. It's annoying because I'm getting enough out of it that I can recognise there's something beyond it. Like sometimes you read a text and you'll be like, yeah, there's nothing to this, it's just nonsense. And a lot of this feels like nonsense, but a lot of it feels like there's something to it. And maybe that's the point. Maybe some of it is nonsense and some of it isn't, to make you sort of annoyed at it. And there's definitely the element of like making fun of overly verbose, sort of wordy, self-important intellectual texts, and the idea of the independent thinker. But also there's this idea of a critique of modernity and of not fitting in with society. And then there's these singers, which are, I don't know what they are. Are they meant to be some sort of idea of the unknowable? The things outside the purview of science? The inherent mysteriousness of the nature of the universe? I just don't know. And so it leads me to this point where I'm like, I don't know. It's frustrating, really. That said, I mean, I feel better about this one than I did the last one. when I read Dubliners, I sort of was just, I don't think anyone was in chat for most of it, so I was just sort of talking this to myself. But here at least I got someone who recognised that, yeah, this is also quite annoying and mysterious. So I appreciate that. I appreciate all of you being there. I think I'm about out of things to say about this text, at least for the time being. No doubt I'll spend some time thinking about it in the coming days and have some revelatory ideas, but if I do, I'll be sure to mention them. But for now, I think we're about to draw to a close. So, I do thank you for being here. And oh, you're very welcome, Tanner. I always appreciate having people around to listen. But yeah, actually speaking of, I do have people in today, so let's do the social thing and see if there's anyone online to raid. No one I really know. Nope. Oh well. Yeah, no problem at all, Nazca, and yeah, in fact, Wild is equally as welcome as you are, Tanner. I appreciate both of you for dropping by, and of course to Abe, who I suspect is probably busy with work, but also makes a point of showing up. I do very much genuinely appreciate you being here to hear me read Kafka and then get confused about it. It's nice. Maybe that's the point as well, actually. The isolation he puts himself into, the feeling of being different, and so detaching himself from society. There's probably something to be drawn from there. That would require a level of self-introspection that I'm not sure I'm fully comfortable with. So, we'll leave it aside for the moment. But yeah, as always, I thank everyone who has been here for being here. I always appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, or night, or whatever time it is for you now. And I hope you have gotten something out of this story as well. And as always, ta-ra.